Hello, everybody. I'm Rob Wallace, presently out on the road. I'm an evolutionary epidemiologist with the People's CDC here with an update on the COVID-19 pandemic. This week, we'll cover the state of global COVID and the state of U.S. COVID. We'll also unpack efforts by COVID minimizers to rewrite the history of COVID-19 as one big overreaction. We begin with global COVID. The Johns Hopkins website from which we previously drew global data since the start of COVID this week is now closed. In the top graph, our world in data using WHO data reports us at 665,000 confirmed global cases this past week, a low we haven't seen since May 2020. The bottom graph shows us down to 4,000 plus confirmed global deaths, which we haven't seen since March 2020. This is at a time when countries around the world are also reducing surveillance, but we also see excess deaths in decline toward pre-pandemic levels, save here Iceland, New Zealand, Taiwan, and Suriname, but even these countries are at lesser excess deaths than earlier in the pandemic. For global COVID cases, we've switched out the New York Times map, which depended on the Johns Hopkins dashboard. This Our World in Data map, again, using WHO data, shows hotspots over the past week. Cases per million population are flat worldwide. Austria remains an epicenter, Chile and South Korea slightly less so. As we can see from these percent changes in caseloads the past couple weeks, rebounds there in the warm colors are still scattered across the globe. In the Western Hemisphere, Panama, Peru, and Chile show increases. Much of Europe, especially France, Ukraine, and Bosnia, is showing increase. Across Eurasia, Iran, India, and Mongolia are showing particularly sharp increases. North Africa, as well as Ghana, Congo, Madagascar, and South Africa are reporting such increases as well. And this is all at a time when the vaccine strategy many governments say they're pursuing instead of non-pharmaceutical interventions is faltering. Much of the world is at best vaccinated for variants no longer circulating. We see uneven campaigns in booster vaccination across the world. On the one hand, Chile, Peru, Uruguay, Cuba, Canada, Belgium, Finland, Germany, Italy, Australia, and Japan show top-tier booster campaigns with 70 or more people boosted per 100 population. In contrast, we see near nothing in Russia, India, Pakistan, Indonesia, and those even reporting in from Africa, as well as mediocre campaigns in the US, Mexico, Brazil, China, and Eastern Europe. This map hasn't changed much, although reported here to be updated March 15th. The CDC reports the US still at a little over 16% of its eligible population 5 years and older with an updated booster dose. The mediocre vaccination campaigns, hand in hand with the rollback in the non-pharmaceutical campaigns that successful vaccination depends on, have been taking place alongside the continuing emergence of multiple Omicron subvariants now circulating across large expanses of the world. Last week, we saw XBB 1.5 coming on strong in the US, UK, Germany, and Canada, there in teal, but now see it also in Australia. XBB is still strong in Spain and South Africa, there in purple. BQ1 strong in Canada, Germany, but less so in the UK and the US. Compared to months previously, recombinants there in lime green are now more greatly represented. Unfortunately, Our World in Data has changed its formatting to include only these countries. One can no longer add additional countries to those already shown here. So we're drawing on covariance.org for the frequencies of genotypes of other countries still reporting some sequences, and we're down to China, Japan, India, Pakistan, Georgia, and Malaysia. That's it. We see that China is presently hosting BA5 and the beginnings of XBB 1.5, Japan BA5, BQ1, and BA 2.75, India entirely XBB 1.5, Pakistan XBB and XBB 1.5, Georgia BA 2.75 and recombinants, and Malaysia XBB 1.5, XBB BA 2.75 and recombinants. Indeed, Raj Narayana, showing here the world diversity of sequences the past 20 days, reports to date that there are 874 designated Omicron sublineages and 154 recombinants with at least one Omicron partner. The resulting damage continues, including long COVID and damage to the immune system. SARS-2 attacks cells and muscles across organ systems, and we're on a near weekly schedule of reporting new results in the damage that long COVID causes. We'll report 2 scientific advances this week. Dartmouth's Mary Louise Kiesler and Brad Duchesne report long COVID interferes with visual recognition and causes prosopagnosia. the loss of the ability to recognize faces. Annie, a long COVID patient they studied, quote, scored normally on tests assessing face detection, face identity perception, object recognition, scene recognition, and non-visual memory. But there in the red dot showed clear impairment on 2 tests of familiar face recognition and 2 tests of unfamiliar face recognition. The Dartmouth team also collected self-reports from 54 long COVID patients, a majority of which reported declines in visual recognition and, relatedly, navigation abilities. Meanwhile, new work shows that while vaccinated people also get long COVID, they do not suffer the autoimmunity that unvaccinated people get. Gillian Jaycox and colleagues showed by rapid extracellular antigen profiling, or REAP, post-vaccination in healthy individuals, patients with autoimmune diseases, and patients with mRNA vaccinated associated myocarditis or damage to the heart, that 1, most individuals generated robust virus-specific antibody responses post-vaccination. That's good. 2, that the quality of this response, however, is impaired in autoimmune patients. And 3, compared to COVID patients, autoantibody dynamics in the vaccinated are remarkably stable. Their REAP scores in red here. COVID patients in blue showed an increased prevalence of new autoantibody reactivities. Even patients with adverse side effects of the vaccine, including myocarditis, did not have increased autoantibody reactivities compared to controls. So in other words, get vaccinated, okay? And you're not going to suffer the autoantibodies, autoimmunity that those that are getting infected with COVID and are not getting vaccinated are now suffering. Now, this past week marked Long COVID Awareness Day, with survivors posting first accounts of their experiences. Programmer Travis Hardy shared that, quote, 6 days before testing positive for COVID, I ran my 3rd half marathon in 5 months. Now, 11 months later, long COVID has changed my life. No more running, hiking, swimming, alcohol, and more, end quote. V remarks, quote, before my mild SARS infection, I was a runner, dancer, explorer, public speaker, organizer. Now I'm 100% confined to my bed, unable to sit up or talk much at all. Tweeting in solidarity with millions affected by this horrendous virus and medical system abandonment. Bree observes, a mild reinfection took my life from me. I can no longer bathe regularly, leave house most weeks, listen to music, tolerate sound, read, walk more than a few blocks, garden, or even crochet most days. I've lost all my friends. I've lost all of my former self. Biomedical engineer Alberto Danis shared, a year ago at 28, I got an almost unnoticeable COVID infection. Healthy, in the best shape of my life, balancing a demanding PhD with an active social life. I am taking part in everything life has to offer. Now I wonder if I ever will be active again. Like many participants, Regina, a journalist, misses her own self. I miss when my life was gym selfies and girls' nights out. I miss how I felt in those moments. Radio producer Katie Clarkson tweeted, I'm no longer able to work in my field as a radio and podcast producer. I was a late bloomer, but I found something I loved and was good at. On the single best day since I got sicker, I was able to see my oldest friend for an hour. At Ipo Eng reports, COVID disabled me at 22 years old. For 2.5 years, I haven't been able to study, do physical activity or work. Here, before long COVID, in kinesiology class, demonstrating an exercise, I can barely brush my teeth or shower now. Joe Mabin's before looked like, quote, LA 10K run, authoring a book, a double piggyback for my kids, speaking on panels with international leaders in healthcare. Life since, 22 hours a day in bed, migraines, dizziness, fainting, nausea, tremors, chest pain, tummy pain, and cognitive dysfunction. Teacher Brooke Keaton shares a sense of being removed from her calling. It has been 26 months and 1 week since I stepped foot in my classroom. I miss teaching, I miss my students, my babies, I miss their families, and I miss my coworkers. Anthropologist Ellison Cooper remembers, this is me just before long COVID. I was a world-traveling, award-winning writer and professor. I spent my days writing, having fun with friends, and being an active mom. Now, 3 years later, I can barely walk a quarter mile and have to lay down after I shower, end quote. Even celebrity isn't enough to put long COVID front and center. Many famous people have been affected, including Lionel Messi in mid-2022. NHL star Brandon Suter missed the entire season from long COVID. Canadian soccer star Alphonso Davies is suffering heart issues from COVID, as is Red Sox pitcher Eduardo Rodriguez. Actress Selma Hayek, Tilda Swinton, Gwyneth Paltrow, Alyssa Milano, and Emma Sams are suffering long COVID. Also, Olympic rower Onag Cousins, Olympic high jumper Priscilla Loomis, and Olympic wrestler Vinesh Phogat. WNBA star Asia Durr, musicians Billie Eilish and Dave Navarro, Native American political prisoner Leonard Peltier, U.S. Senator Tom Kaine, Senator James Inhofe, who voted against COVID aid, is retiring because of his long COVID. Turning to the U.S., we see from the Walgreens COVID-19 index that as of March 17th, national test positivity is down to more than a quarter for both rapid tests and PCR. The CDC reports the latest round of excess deaths above the average deaths the past 6 years associated with the pandemic continues. The last month reports a decline under the baseline. That is likely a measure of true decline, but may also represent data still being collected across the U.S. This New York Times map shows COVID cases per 100,000 population. Spatially, the national caseload appears steady in its rollback from January. We see caseloads seemingly peeled back from Northwest down through California. The Southwest appears to be drifting back up into Nevada. The Plains states host many single counties with sharp peaks for small populations. The upper Midwest and the South are clearer, and the East Coast, save parts of Maine and Vermont, is also clearer. The Appalachian redoubt from Kentucky to Virginia that's been hanging on for some time is also clearing up. Alaska remains a hotspot, although slightly cooler. On the other hand, other modes of tracking COVID-19 show the virus still surging here and there. We see the levels of SARS-2 virus detected in the wastewater that comes through our sewage plants, in some ways a leading indicator of the pandemic for February 26th through March 12th. In the oranges and reds, we see plants at 60% or more of all the samples taken nationally since December 2021 in Washington State, in the Bay Area, Salt Lake City, Colorado, Nebraska, and throughout the industrial Midwest, Illinois, Wisconsin, Indiana, Ohio, and West New York State. The East Coast shows a steep decline. Florida has also cooled. However, the more acute measure of changes in sewage loads over the past 15 days perhaps better show transient dynamics that are happening only recently. We see some areas heating up more than others. Parts of the Northwest, Colorado, Missouri, but also in winding isopleths through Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, West Virginia, suddenly Pennsylvania, and much of New York State, upstate and downstate, although New York City appears cooled off. Biologist Mark Johnson, who leads wastewater efforts in Missouri, warns, however, that Missouri's numbers are, quote, still 4 times higher than they were this time last year, and that there are lots of cases below the radar. Here are the 7-day average of fractions of hospital beds filled by COVID patients across 3,800 plus hospitals reporting March 10th through 16th, mapped by the People CDC's Les Schaffer. Schaffer readjusted the quantiles in a way that better marks which hospitals are truly under COVID duress. Previously, the top quantile showed hospitals with more than 5% beds filled. Here, he adjusted the top to a third to half of beds filled by COVID. Those are a lot of beds, and we see 2 hospitals in that top tier, one in Massachusetts, the other in Missouri. But a lot of hospitals, those in red, are up to 35%. The demand may be a function of COVID load, bed availability, and an area's underlying susceptibility, often deeply embedded in its socioeconomic fabric. To sum up, here's the People CDC's version of our present community transmission by county as of March 16th, mapped again by Les Schaffer. The map shows the combo of caseloads and test positivity that the CDC plots, now reporting only once a week. But unlike the CDC, the People CDC differentiates the high level of danger counties are subjected to beyond 10% COVID positivity into high, very high, and extremely high exposure. Down at the bottom, we see that the People CDC also differentiates exposure by both the percent of counties and by the percent population. Overall, we see a continuing spatial contraction here in the US, including the West Coast, Texas, much of the South, up the East Coast, and New England. Alaska, parts of the Southwest up into the desert states, and parts of the Dakotas are still hosting hotspots. Iowa remains a suspect donut hole of data, long reporting in lesser counts than its Midwest neighbors. But even those plain states are peeling back, and we're down to 27.5% of the American people in communities subjected to high to extremely high COVID exposure. That's terrific news, although that's still a third of the population, and that it may be in part dependent on reductions in testing. And we still have another 34% subjected to substantial exposure. The outbreak stateside continues to evolve, with here the continued emergence of XBB 1.5 squeezing out other major sublineages. Although this is entirely dependent on place. Here's the 15-day trend of all the genetic sequences of detected sublineages in the US as of March 17th, including their geographic origins. XBB 1.5 in blue is surging ahead in states across the country. Other than some BQ 1.1 in red and a dusting of BQ1 and CH 1.1, the rest are largely different XBB sublineages. So there are all sorts of other subvariants and sublineages circulating in such a way as to offer possible candidates for the next dominant variant or to contribute to the next recombinant that accelerates beyond both vaccine and population immunity. Indeed, all eyes are now on the new sublineage XBB 1.16, reported to cause more cases and deaths in India, and that's now also beginning to spread here stateside. We'll finish this week's broadcast with COVID minimizers' efforts to rewrite history along the lines of the pandemic wasn't so bad and that sheltering in place and masking were ineffectual or made matters worse. Now, here's the difference in COVID cases in two Italian cities that instituted lockdowns early and late, sharing the same date of their first recorded COVID case in 2020. Even a week difference between Lodi in green and Bergamo in pink led to different COVID trajectories. Clearly, lockdowns were never going to be enough, especially given all the other interventions minimalists and denialists also rejected weren't pursued that well either. But clearly, they had an impact, as has been demonstrated not only in Italy, but in countries around the world. At best, the rewritten history is a version of survivorship bias. Look, I survived, therefore the outbreak wasn't so bad. As statistician Abraham Wald showed in World War II, it wasn't the parts of the planes that were riddled by bullets that needed to be better armored. Those are the planes that came back. The planes that didn't make it back suffered catastrophic damage to the other parts, untouched in survivors. So saying, I survived the pandemic, perhaps bored and crotchety, doesn't necessarily tell us about the full nature of the virus or the pandemic experience. It's also a violation of what Nassim Taleb popularized as the fallacy of silent evidence. Those who were killed by COVID can't presently share their position on the nature of our pandemic response. Worse, this rewriting is an effort to normalize mass death and the mass suffering of the families of the dead, and the as many as 36 million US long COVID survivors, some of whom we highlighted earlier. Indeed, without batting an eye, liberal minimizer Leanna Wen makes such efforts explicit. Quote, we might come to expect some frequency of post-COVID symptoms and the resulting disability as a new normal, end quote. Yale epidemiology professor Greg Consalves, naming Brett Stevens, Nate Silver, and John Chait, identify the wellspring of such commentary in a piece for The Nation. Quote, this denigration of scientists by arrogant pundits with no scientific training who have nevertheless been accepted as trusted voices on these issues has happened again and again during the pandemic. It's part of a growing proliferation of commentators who have declared themselves authorities in just about every field under the sun. Whatever their actual level of knowledge, they're not so much experts as experts in being experts. In other settings, law professor Frank Pasquale has dubbed this phenomenon meta-expertise. As he writes, the meta-expert asserts expansive intellectual authority and positions themselves as a powerful tribune of the people, capable of vindicating both common sense and counterintuitive findings in the face of gildish lethargy and incuriosity, end quote. The meta-expertise, including Wen's refusal to engage in the best way to treat long COVID, like keeping people from being infected in the first place, has gone to such lengths as to inspire scathing parody. The Atlantic is eviscerating arguments repeatedly presented in liberal staples like The Atlantic, Slate, The New York Times, The Washington Post, and The New Yorker. We've wasted $50 billion in taillights, goes one post hoc fallacy, mirroring exactly Wen's argument. Let's spend that money on car accident victims instead. The skewering continues, quote, looks like we're going to need more disabled parking spaces. We should see this as a good thing. Or, you're not sick, you just need to try harder. Is there a pandemic of laziness right now? And here, no one is able to tell me why I've been sick ever since I caught COVID. No, I'm not going to listen to anyone who says it's because of COVID. Now, this is Freakonomics for system apologists. Biden liberals are largely following in the footsteps of right-wingers destroying public health as an operationalizable intervention, as if an individualized medical freedom, person to person, can staunch a pathogen infecting millions. Instead of assimilating the lessons of a deadly virus that killed at least 1.1 million Americans and bolstering public health, rightist conspiracy theory places a U.S. campaign of half measures and dithering that led to so many deaths as an overreaction. Public health departments across the country have been stripped of their powers to intervene, even into local restaurants serving up salmonella. So the U.S. is placing itself in an even worse position than it was after 40 years defunding public health as a public commons or switching it out for lucrative biomedical commodities. The New York Times reports a successful rightist campaign led in part by former Trump National Security Advisor Michael Flynn to take over the board of Sarasota Memorial, a public hospital in Florida, under allegations the hospital refused to prescribe Trumpist fads, ivermectin, and hydroxychloroquine, despite doing far better in COVID survivorship and release times than many hospitals across the country. The attacks at the state level followed those the Trump administration directed at the federal level. In another article, the Times interviewed former CDC employees who quit upon unmitigated interference. Quote, all through February 2020, agency scientists have been gathering evidence that the new coronavirus was being spread by people without symptoms. In early March, the CDC said that many employees who had been deployed elsewhere to track COVID-19 must isolate at home for 14 days, whether or not he or she had symptoms. Interviews with 11 current and former agency employees, including trainees at the Epidemic Intelligence Service, as well as a review of text messages and other documents obtained by the New York Times, portray an agency under intense pressure from the country's political leaders. Some younger staff members wrestled with guilt, anger, and a rising sense of powerlessness as administration officials meddled with or simply disregarded important scientific research, end quote. The irony is that the same could be said of the CDC under the Biden administration, which from pressure from the White House recommended both no more masking for the vaccinated, even as the Delta variant made its way stateside from India, and from pressure from corporations recommended only 5 days of quarantining, despite all the documented viral dynamics to the contrary. Remember the 14 days? The Times article makes no mention of these actions under the Biden administration. Indeed, Trumpist anti-intellectualism is now a highbrow liberal staple, even as, we must note, many liberals also reject the present administration's denialism. As public health lawyer Stephen Donziger relayed, the results of the first chemical tests at the East Palestine site of the toxic derailment in February are now in. They report dioxins 14 times higher than what other states consider legal. But the Biden EPA refuses to test for these carcinogens, claiming the area safe. In contrast, the wealthiest worst decisions are rewarded as, once again, too big to fail. The Fed responded in a matter of days to Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank's collapses, and a weeping Sharon Stone, who would have lost half her money, with a total bailout starting at $200 billion for non-FDIC insured accounts. One suspects it is no coincidence that Silicon Valley UK handed out $18 million in executive bonuses after HSBC rescued it, bonuses that weren't originally scheduled. Sending thousands of workers to their long COVID infections, running uninspected bomb trains through working class towns with the accepted understanding thousands derail a year, and bailing out sketchy banks covering bad startup bets, but not kids on the hook for hundreds of thousands in student loans, it is about as open a declaration of class war as the ruling class can muster. Concentrating damage on land and labor for profits that 99% will never see. As understood by practitioners all the way back to Rudolf Virchow, public health isn't just about viruses and vaccines. It's about who controls the state and the surplus value working people generate on the daily. That's why the class war the rich are waging on the American people requires engagement in the other direction. If, as a start, supporting labor action by medical staff and others for increasing staffing and health and safety standards. As in the 24-hour unfair labor practice strike at Henry Mayo Newhall Hospital in Valencia, California. Hospital workers claim Henry Mayo has engaged in illegal bargaining tactics while staff are pushing for higher wages and the increased staffing that also protects patients. But we'll also need a broader movement to counter both the rightists taking over hospital and school boards in Florida and elsewhere, and liberal meta-experts online tearing down public health during a pandemic. And that's COVID This Week from the People's CDC. You can find all our episodes on the People's CDC YouTube channel, and you can learn more about the People's CDC and read this week's COVID weather report at our website, peoplescdc.org.